Well, everybody knows the Zimbabwean voice now, so that's for sure. And it's a beautiful voice, that one. One of unity, one of togetherness, one of peace, one of love, you know. That's the way forward. Oga, Oga.
Just a little bit of background of why this might not be your typical episode of, Zimbabwean Voices that you're watching, where Dumi is asking the questions and so on and so forth, and why I feel personally privileged to be a part of this process. And when you reached out for me to do this, I had no two questions but to just say yes, which is that often when you are in the business, for lack of a better way of saying it, of asking people questions, a lot of the times there are times where you wish you could be asked questions. There's also times when it's necessary for you to be asked questions, particularly when there's a lot of depth that is in you as well that needs to also be seen by the world. So an opportunity to be able to help Dumi to do that is awesome. And so today, I am asking this man the questions and he is answering. So all the things that you find annoying to me about people answering questions and not taking too much time, not getting to the point, let's see if you're as good at it as you want others to be. How you doing, my man?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much. I thought it was nice that you do it since you're the first episode. And since you do this, for a living, I thought, it would be a nice full circle loop if we got, Kuda on the podcast to interview me. So I'm well, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No problem, man. Anytime. So the thing about it is Zimbabwean Voices is clearly something that resonated with a lot of people, particularly when I started seeing the episodes popping up consistently, also seeing the reception, you sharing the data behind how much people are actually receiving this. You actually have a good thing going here, bro. And I just wanted to know, how do you feel about what you've done so far?
I feel kind of weird about it, in many ways. I think, of course, in many ways, it's just an idea that I wanted to see expressed. This idea of positive Zimbabwean stories amongst young people that look like you and me being shared with the world. Of course, it was cool to see stories of people like Strive Nasiva, or just maybe what people call successful people in the limelight. But I feel like there weren't enough stories at our age bracket, if I can call it that. So having that hunch, acting on the hunch, sharing all of those stories, and then seeing that it gets received in places like Poland or South America or you look at the back end, you say, wait, what? This is ridiculous. So it feels weird, but at the same time, honor that people actually take the time to listen. They don't have to do this because they're busy. So I appreciate that they actually do. So weird, but fulfilling at the same time.
Weird and fulfilling at the same. I think that's a very typical place to be when you're seeing something take off. But a lot of people, particularly in the time that we're in right now, can make a lot of assumptions about why you'd be inspired to do something like this. I mean, Joe Rogan is the name that comes to everyone's mind when this space opens. And then you see a lot of other movements, podcasts, conversation series popping up. So was this part of the inspiration of why you started this? Why did you start the Zimbabwean Voices? What was the need?
I think the first thing is a bit about me is of course I'm from Zim, but I've lived in different parts of the world. So I've had the opportunity to be Zimbabwean, but then also look at Zimbabwe from a distance, or my Zimbabweanness at a distance. And what I found when I would leave, all the stories I would crave what I call nourishment. So I feel like Zimbabwean Voices is my umbilical cord to home, if I can call it that. Sometimes you leave, when you're home, you don't really think about it. When you leave, you want, oh my goodness, I need Zimbabwean music, Zimbabwean food, I need nourishment. So this was a tool for that. So when I left, I found without this, all the stories I would hear I listen to a lot of interviews. I listen to interviews more than I listen to music. Like I listen to so many interviews, and none of the interviews that I was hearing or seeing online represented people that looked like me, or sounded like me, or had shared lived experiences. So I think the initial idea was, I think that should exist, but I didn't think I was the one to at least bring it to the world. But eventually got to a point where I think I was just sitting on it for so long in my head, I just had to kind of execute it and get it over the line. So it was just a desire to see stories about you and I expressed, and stay connected to home with all the traveling that I do away from home. That was the idea. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna challenge you a bit, because I think that's fantastic what you're saying, and I love the fact that, you know, when you sat back and you said, oh, well, someone has to make this, and then eventually, you know, like all true moments of inspiration, you realize, oh, that person is me. So we're very grateful that you answered your own call. But something you said, which I think particularly you and I, with the similar background of how we grew up in Zim, come to understand what you said when you said shared living experiences. How have you grown as a salad, as a person who grew up in a very niche bubble section of Zimbabwe, and then wanting to now attempt to have a medium that speaks for many parts of the country that you probably haven't really been in touch with? How have you grown as a Zimbabwean, you know, doing this series?
I think very good point. I think the most important thing is unapologetically owning who you are. So as a Salah, of course. I think when I was starting the podcast in the beginning, the big question was, you don't want to create an echo chamber of people and that sound and look like you, right? So I think the biggest question mark was always reaching out to people that don't look like you where possible. And what's hard is when you're starting a podcast, of course, initially the only people that will say yes are people that know you. And of course, people that know you kind of represent your demographic, if I can call it that. So I think the tough part was getting people outside of that bubble, which I found very challenging. But like the more I've gotten to produce, even there's more episodes I'm recording now, I've got to speak to people in Bulawayo, or people who are like deaf, or people that are in different parts of socioeconomic groups. That's still something I'm struggling with. But I think the most important thing in this process was like being mindful of that I exist in one niche bubble. And of course, as I keep making this show, I should never lose track of trying to broaden beyond where I'm at. But I think that's the first thing. But the second thing is also that like one of the intents of starting the podcast was that what we seem to be, what we define as Zimbabwean, I think is a lot broader, right? I think so that's how part of the idea was speaking to people that look like me, who grew up in Borrowdale and what have you, but then also speaking to people that are in Bulawayo, but speaking to people also in Australia or the UK that sound British, quite honestly, but they're still Zimbabwean, right? I think it's not a good idea to kind of try and silo everybody. I think we're all Zimbabwean. So part of the idea was like showing the full picture of what that looks like. And that was kind of my intent that I haven't seen on many shows. It's like the full kind of color palette of what Zimbabweans sound like. That's kind of like the big goal of this thing. So yeah.
So everyone from Zimbabwe to Barbwe, bro.
Zimbabwe, all of them, white, black,
Barbwe,
white, black, Indian. I want all the diversity. So that's always been like that. Zimbabweanness in all its shapes, sizes, sounds. That's the goal. And of course, it's a journey. Yeah.
Okay. And when you find, you've spoken to now several Zimbabweans, several demographics, diaspora across the country, even where you are in the United States right now. What would you say you've learned as a common thread that we all share, other than having a personality akin to Arsenal fans?
On the Arsenal
Long
fans,
safari. Yeah, go on then.
I think we're just an incredibly, someone said this, we're just an incredibly hopeful people. I think the long suffering and the hope, they exist together, but more than anything, we're incredibly hopeful people. I think the idea starts like with the name Zimbabwe itself. It's still a baby in many ways, right? It's still like a startup, in many ways. It's a baby that's still trying to grow up and figure out what it's like to be an adult and so on. So in its present form, the name Zimbabwe is still a young country. So with that name, naturally derives a lot of hope and ambition for more, to do more, be more. And I found that quite interesting to be like, Zimbabweans want more and are very hopeful. And that's quite an interesting sign. And even if they're away from home, there's always like this, like, I don't know if it's a longing or like a pull or a tug that wants to see more from this place, or do more for this place, or to express more for this place. I find that really interesting. And they're also like really proud as well, especially when they leave. Especially when they leave. When they're there, maybe not as much. When they leave, like the pride just kind of like shines through. So those have been interesting things that I can think of right now. But
yeah. And it's interesting because when I lived in Straya, I went exactly through what you're going through, where there's certain things that I took for granted, and then when you're away, there's this longing and desire, and you essentially have a fire that gets lit up for your country. How do you think? And I know you're probably not prepared for this kind of question, but then again, you shouldn't have asked me to ask the question. Seeing the way a Zimbabwean person almost gets switched on, it's almost like the battery gets cranked up in the back, and then the person gets switched on when they're in the diaspora, when they're in an environment that is conducive for them to become themselves. And that when people are at home, they're probably not as expressive, not as confident, not as go-getting. How do you think, in your opinion, based on the times that you've lived in Zim, lived in South, lived in America, lived in the UK, how can that Zimbabweanness transfer, the diaspora Zimbabweanness transfer to those of us who are at home just thinking that, you know what, there's nothing else to do here but just keep grinding?
I think so. I've lived in, let's say, I've lived in Zimbabwe, I've spent time in South Africa, now I'm in the US, right? And then I've been spending, I'm in business school now, and I've been spending a lot of time in, let's say, entrepreneurship circles here. And then I was speaking with a classmate, and we talked about this idea of oxygen. And in America, ideas have tons of oxygen. Like if you have ideas, you get funding, you get mentorship, you get capital. It's actually pretty overwhelming to see how much ideas are nurtured and incubated like seedlings, like really nurtured and helped grow. And so it's no wonder why Facebook and all of these companies are from here. So there's oxygen here. When you go to South Africa, as an example, less oxygen, but still oxygen, if I can call it that. Less oxygen, but still oxygen. I remember I lived there, and you work hard, you push hard, and there's an output. You say, wow, I worked hard, now I can buy a house, or I can do X, Y, and Z. And then obviously when I was in Harare, it felt like there's such limited oxygen specifically in terms of the environment and how it incubates ideas. That's just like an analogy to say, I think Zimbabweans are like our biggest asset. The Zimbabwean people are our biggest asset. But I don't know if we've set up an environment that is conducive for mobility and being a go-getter, if that makes sense. Because it's hard, right? Yeah. It's pretty hard. Like if you leave your house and then there's a policeman there's a roadblock every few stops, or if there's potholes or there's no power, it's really hard to just go when there are all of these hurdles in your way on the regular. So I don't think it's a case of, oh, because I'm in the diaspora, I'm more ambitious. I just think it's because you're in the diaspora, there are less hurdles in your way. So it becomes easier to like operate, and you're more appreciative because you know what hurdles look like. And you say, oh, here there are no hurdles. Obviously, not that there aren't hurdles, but they're less than what you're accustomed to. So I don't think it's that. It's just that we need to get out of each other's way to help each other flourish.
That is awesome. And I think it's a brilliant segue to my next set of questions, because it's very telling why, when asked a question like that, your natural place to take inspiration from to answer is entrepreneurship. Because yourself are an entrepreneur, yourself, you've handled many a business venture here in Zimbabwe. So that makes me want to now know more about yourself. Tell me the origin story. Where does Dumi come from? How did Dumi come to be where he is? Why his shoulders shaped like a tree trunk? No, what's up? What's going on, fam? Let us know. Who is Dumi Mabhena?
um, born and raised, born in Harare. My my father's from Shurugwi. My mother's from the Manicaland area in Giambe. Um, and when I was born in Harare, but I was actually lived in Gweru first when I was a child. So my father used to be in the Air Force. Yeah, so that in the Air Force they have a Thornhill Air Base out there. So he used to fly like he was trained as a pilot, but he started off in the Air Force. So I grew up in Thornhill in Gweru for the first early years of my life. And then after that, we moved to Harare because my parents they were part of a family business, and that family business, they owned trucks, like waste removal trucks. That was the thing that they did. So yeah, I would say for the most part, I had like a really, really, really happy childhood. I don't remember Gweru like that per se, but I remember, of course, moving to Harare. Where do we live in the beginning? Um, there's a place we used to call Churu Farm Flats, which is like on the intersection of Samora Machel and I think not Second Street Extension, but I'm forgetting, but it's along Samora Machel. They're just like, and those are my first memories being like, oh, okay, cool. And then the next memory, of course, we moved to Borrowdale when I was like 5 or 6, and I grew up in Harare most of my time there. But I had a happy, really, really happy childhood. But I was raised by entrepreneurs in many ways, so I think it was in my DNA, and that I saw a lot of people being entrepreneurial, doing things, going after things, building things. My father used to love building houses. My mom used to, she's an operator. She's a chemical engineer by training, but of course, that engineering thinking would obviously go into how she run her business. And I just saw that being modeled after me every day, people going after things, building things. And that was always I'm always inspired by my parents. So that's kind of like my origin story. I don't know how far I must keep going, but that's kind of like the gist of my childhood. Yeah.
Okay. And so where did you go to school? Where'd you pick up the twang, bruv?
Where did I pick up the English? It's funny. I couldn't speak English until I was like 5, 6.
No.
I swear. I swear.
No.
I swear.
No.
I swear. I'm telling you, I couldn't speak English. I used to go to I think I just wasn't articulate. And my mom was panicking. She was like, Monanga, we can't do this. We can't do this from today going forward. No one speaks Shona in this house, which is a terrible thing. But I think she was panicking, being like, I can't have a non-English speaking child going to Heritage in grade 1. Like, it'll be a disaster. So I couldn't speak any English. And then she set a rule. She was like, look, we have to learn how to speak English in this house if you're going to start grade 1. So I went to Heritage first for the first grade 1 to 4. And then I went to Canada for a year, then moved back and went to St. John's Prep for grade 6 and 7. But the reason why we left was that's when like inflation started happening and things started going very pear-shaped. But of course, leaving away from home isn't as easy as it seems. So we came back. Then when I came back, I went to St. John's Prep. But yeah, Heritage was some of the best years of my life. Those first 4 years, some of the best years of my life. And I think I've been chasing those first 4 years. I think I've been trying to chase that. Zimbabwe for me is always that picture. Heritage grade 1 to 4. It was a good time. It was a happy time. Yeah.
Awesome. And then so where'd you go to high school? Where'd you go to university? We're trying to pick up a pattern here.
Pick up. I went to high school in South Africa at the time. I have a cousin, Hilton Dariki, who's like my brother in many ways.
The cap, bro.
The captain, yeah, captain of the Sables. So he was, of course, extremely athletically gifted, and then he was invited for a scholarship interview in South Africa. And we were at the same school at the time when they said, Dumi, you want to come on a half-term trip? I said, sure. I mean, I'm not doing anything. So I came on this half-term trip. And then when we were there, what happened? He had his whole full uniform, everything, deputy head boy. Though I was just there, my CVs, nothing serious. And then they were like, oh, so he also did his whole full interview. I think he did really well. And they're like, so who's this guy that's with them? I was like, oh, this is Dumi. And they said, where are you going to high school? Like, no, I'll probably just go to St. John's, St. John's College, cool. Like, no, but you should apply here. This is the school. You should apply here. I said, really? You think I should apply? Like, yeah, you should apply here, the forms. So I went home and then I applied because it's a wonderful school. And then I applied to Michael House that year. And then we got in. So it wasn't really in my plans like that. I just went on a trip. It just happened kind of coincidentally. And I went to high school in South Africa, which was, I think, like changed in many ways. Like, I won't say the trajectory of my life, but it was a very impactful part of my life. So I spent 5 years there in KZN, in the Midlands, in boarding school. And I'll come back and forth to Zimbabwe throughout the course of the year when I could. And I also felt really weird because in many ways I'm Zimbabwean, but that's when Zimbabwe was going through really tough times. But whenever Zimbabwe is going through really tough times, I often leave. Like, it's not like I'm always in it for the most part, right? I've often been back and forth, which has been an interesting one, which I don't know if it's a survivor's guilt thing, but I've been lucky that I haven't had to be there all the time for the most difficult times of our country's history. But then after I finished high school, I moved back to Harare for a year. I lived with my mom and dad there, and then I went to university in Scotland, in a small town called Stirling. I was playing a lot of rugby at the time, and that was kind of my undergrad. I did that for 4 years, but I changed to a business degree after a year or so. That's kind of like 10 years truncated into 2 minutes.
Oh, snap. Okay, that's very, very interesting. I mean, from Gweru to Georgetown, that could be an album. I can't wait for the mixtape to come out. you know what I'm saying? From the G to the G.
So hard.
Know what it is. But one thing, the reason why I asked you the question like that was, you know me, there's a reason for any line of questioning. Is from a very early age, you had, shall I say, the privilege of being able to contrast Zimbabwe at many developmental stages in your life. How has that impacted you as a Zimbabwean? So as a high school kid, you were able to come in and out and say, oh, this is South Africa, this is Zimbabwe, this is South Africa, this is Zimbabwe. And then as you grow up, and even now still you're constantly juxtaposing. What has that done for your Zimbabweanness?
I think in many ways, like, I didn't realize this until I was doing a lot of writing early. And I think the big thing was the frustration coming back and forth was, I think the first thing was knowing who I am and my identity. The first thing is like, oh, I'm Zimbabwean. Like, there's no question about it. Like, when you leave, oh, I knew definitively, this is who I am. But the second thing is like, I'm Zimbabwean, and then as I come in and out, I see, because I went to school in South Africa when 2010 was happening. Like, this was before, like, the build up towards that. So whenever I saw airports being built, things moving forward, and things really happening. And I felt really frustrated seeing where, like, how stagnant we were in terms of our progression. You go to the UK, you go to the US, and it was very similar. Like, you go back and forth. Not that we aren't moving, but this pace at which we're moving was very slow. So it then becomes natural that you end up spending time doing things like development, try to understand, how does development work? Entrepreneurship, or how do entities move forward in a way that is efficient or fast? Because you've been in a place where things aren't moving as quickly as you would hope, or at the pace at which the world is moving. So one, there's like pride and identity, but the second thing was question marks around pace of development and things moving forward, and why we aren't moving at the same pace as others. I think those are kind of the main two things. And then trying to get to the root of what those issues are. I think part of this podcast is also similar. It's like doing different people's stories, but also trying to understand, like, in history, you have to look back at history to be like, okay, where did we come from? What does it mean to be Zimbabwean? What is the root of all of these issues? And trying to get answers to all of these questions. So that's kind of the three things that I've learned.
That's awesome, and I know it's mighty rude of me to insert a story of my own in your interview. And if you allow me 2 seconds to share something based on what you just said, I have a little nephew of mine who's very lucky to be well traveled. I mean, his passport really makes a lot of adults look very, very unorganized with life, you know, and he recently went to Australia. And when he came back home after that trip, the first thing he said when they were driving out of the airport, going back home, was Zimbabwe looks really old. You know, he could tell that he had just been in a modern place, and then coming home at 6 years old, having the conscious mind to be able to say, this place looks really old. However, the question that then comes out of that for you, and after this, I'm gonna ask you another question about yourself, is how then, with your constant juxtaposing, with the, you know, constant comparisons, would you say Zimbabweans should look at how we should progress as a country, or as from an infrastructure standpoint, or whatever? Because we always look at other places and say the grass is greener on the other side, but you have a tangible experience of what that grass is like, and you know what's missing at home. What would you say to people at home, to other Zimbabweans, about how we should think about our future and our progression and our growth? Do we need the malls? Do we need a high-speed train? Do we need this? Do we need that? What would you say we should really think about our own growth?
Oof, it's a big question to ask. I don't want to speak on behalf of the definitive. I don't know if I want to give a definitive answer, but that maybe.
But no, it's all of your opinion. That's what's up.
But the thing I've been kind of exploring a lot around, at least, is I did an interview last week with a gentleman called Prince. He runs a show he's from Bulawayo, called Magwiza Made Me Cook, and the show, you should check it out on YouTube. And basically, he interviews a lot of people across the world about, in Zimbabwe specifically, around African food and culture. And the big thing that he's on right now is this idea of African thought. And the essence of that basically is that when you go to Heritage, when you go to St. John's, when you go to Mike House, Zimbabwe is never at the center. It's never really at the center. It's like a peripheral, the thing on the peripheral, or the periphery, right? But it's never like at the center. And in many ways, you end up aspiring to be an Englishman, or aspiring to go to Oxford or Georgetown or wherever, right? You end up being, your outlook is always outside as opposed to where you are. So I don't even think, like, when it talks about like comparing Zimbabwe with other places, I think the thing I'm trying to explore more is like the mental work that I have to do, that many other people have to do, to identify as being what we are, and kind of doing the work in our minds first, and whatever way that looks like, and trying to figure out, okay, if things aren't progressing outside, what's going on internal? What's the internal stuff that's happening that's preventing us from doing that, and unpacking that first. So I think, to answer your question, it's like, I think we first need to unpack a lot to be like, what's going on inside of us that's like preventing us from moving forward, or treating ourselves as such, or getting in each other's way. Why are we doing that? Where does that come from? When did that start? Is that a thing that started now? If it changed, why did that change? Can we reverse that? So I think we need to do a lot of unpacking first. Then once you know what the boxes are, maybe rearranging them in a way that's useful. And I think then from that foundation, I think everything else comes out of that. So I don't think it's like emulating other people. It's just doing internal work to figure out what's going on internally. My opinion is that it's like, we aren't really raised to think that we're at the center. We're always raised to think outward, and to think, oh man, America's way. And I know it's so ironic, because I'm literally sitting to you. I'm sitting here as I say this, like the US, but I look back and I'll be like, wow, in many ways, I was taught to think that the world had it all. But in many ways, I think Zimbabwe has it all, in many ways. And just getting back to put Africa at the center and thinking about that, and thinking about how we can reorder how we think. I think that's a basic foundation. Then from there, I think everyone also will follow. Because in Australia, Australians put Australia first. Or in Britain, it's like Britain first, America first. Not like in an overtly nationalistic way, but I'm just mean in terms of like, we are not trying to be anything else other than what we are. And we build from that vantage point. Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting point that, a lot of the times the answers seem abstract or just, filled with rhetoric or nice ways, unpacking boxes and so on and so forth. But what people don't realize is, like you mentioned, the country is the example that you gave. Sometimes the advantage that they have is because they spent that time unpacking and even going as far as, like, when you watch those 1980s Rocky movies and so on and so on, and it's just being embedded in you. Love your place, love your place, love your place. Eventually you love your place. So I think there's that deep-seated love that's missing in Zim. I think you nailed it quite well. But the thing I love about you, Dumi, is that unlike quite a lot of people in this country, and I'm in Zim, so I can say this, is unlike a lot of people in Zim, you've actually tried to wrestle with being the difference. You've actually tipped your hat to say, I want to do this. And this podcast that you have is just but a semblance of what you've actually tried to do. So I want to say three words, and then you rattle off to the audience what I mean when I say this, right? And to bring to context what I've just said about you actually tried your best to be in the difference making. Green bar soap. Go.
After I finished my undergrad, I moved back to Harare, and we had trying to find a job, right? Like any sensible person who goes to go to university anyway, you say, okay, I finished university, I want to now make something of myself. And it was kind of tough to kind of find a job. I mean, and the thing that came to, there was an opportunity that happened. I think even before then it was hard because it was like, man, I feel like I should be getting more traction based off all the privilege that I've received and help that I've got to, to make something of myself. And nothing was really moving at the pace that I had hoped. But I was staying in Harare at the time, and because I couldn't find a job, we had to make one. We had to literally create employment for yourself in many ways. So my entrepreneurial venture was we had a soap manufacturing plant in Chitungwiza, which was like a phenomenal shock baptism of fire. As I can imagine, a Borodale raised boy going to Chitungwiza, like industrial area every day and working out of there. It was actually the best thing for my professional development, if I can call it that. In economies like Zim, of course, if people on $100 a month, $200 a month, the disposable income goes towards necessities. If you're in the US, you can sell skims and cupcakes and all of these things, right? And be very successful at it. But in Zim, what happens is that the disposable income is low. Therefore, for the average citizen, the disposable income isn't that significant. So money goes towards essentials like sugar, soap, flour, bread, cooking oil, and so on. So soap became like a really useful product. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there was a big soap shortage in Zimbabwe at the time. Unilever had left. A lot of the soap you see now is being imported rather than being manufactured locally. And the main raw material for soap was just being given away for free. So I was like, damn, if they're giving away raw material for free, and my parents own waste removal trucks that are disposing of this raw material for free, what if we use the main input that makes soap, and then use that we're getting for free, and then of course build a company off the back of that. So for 2 years, I ran a soap manufacturing facility in Chitungwiza. We had 10 staff. I think I was like 22. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done one of the hardest things I've ever done to this day. It was incredibly difficult. But my first time, building something with your hands, making a product, going to market, going to Badem Sika, and selling, and selling out and being like, whoa, okay. Or going to Domboshawa, finding customers, and going to just different corners of Zimbabwe and, really trading in the truest sense. So I think that was kind of like the baptism of fire / foundation of my working life after university. And I'm forever grateful for it. In the end, it failed because we couldn't scale in the way that we wanted to. But even that, it was good to learn how to fail. Like, wow, to try something, build something, get customers, and then fail after 2 years, and then be like, damn, okay, can we start again? So that was my first venture, and it was very enlightening. But I learned a lot from that.
When you were when you were going through that, I love the conversations we used to have. And one thing that I deeply admired and what I found very inspirational, something that I probably didn't share enough with you at the time, but you were heroic to me, was something that I think is missing in our country is just peeps who, yes, we all need to talk, but there's a difference when you talk when you've tried. There's a difference when you talk when you've put effort. There's a difference when you talk when you actually can then say, but these are the barriers, and you realize that the barriers aren't always the ones that people think about. They're not the ones that people make assumptions over or philosophize and so on and so forth. That sometimes the barriers, your self-determination, just working with a tired Zimbabwean spirit. Imagine having all the resources, but your workforce has a you don't pay me enough attitude, and having to deal with those things, and you realize that the answers aren't always the ones that you think. But I think that's why I listened to your podcast, because for me, you're an informed place. You didn't just start this because you had things to say or you just wanted to start a podcast. You've actually put your hat in and you actually want to discover what other people are doing. So along your journeys, how many other Dumis have you come across? And by that I mean, how many other inspirational, go-getters, doers have you got on? What's your favorite interview? Who's your favorite person you've spoken to thus far? Not to put you on the spot. I know you love talking to everyone.
Yes.
What's up? I just got that out the way for you.
No, good. No, I think the truth is, and I'm not just doing this to be politically correct. I think I like to learn, just in general. I like to learn, and I learn something from everyone that I speak to. So I like to look at it like Zimbabwean Voices like a tree, and like a tree has like fruit, and every time we have a podcast, it's like a fruit is added to like the tree. And sometimes I don't need the fruit right now. Like I have a conversation I share it with everybody, but then sometimes I'll be going through something, I'll be like, but the one time Mangwe said the most important thing is I would like to see in Zimbabweans is seeing everyone being invested in each other. Like that Mangwe once said that. Then I'll use that fruit. Oh, that's fruit I wanted. Or let's say I'll say, oh, the one time Prince said the most important thing is seeing people being proud of who they are. Oh, so everyone has something like a little quote or one-liner that I always kind of come back to. Or like the one girl, she said, I come back to this all the time. She said the one time in our conversation, we spoke about, because she's very good at she's very young and quite successful in terms of, and bringing things from her mind into reality. And she said, how do you do that? And she says, when I have a dream, I just go. So now when I have things I want to do, I don't think anymore. I just go. Do you know what I'm saying? So the point I'm trying to make is that I've met so many people who have such important things, I just take and say, ooh, that's important, then I take it. And that's why I want to do more. So I think if everyone listening, I want to do more. If you have people that, of course, that are cool and you would think cool stories are important to be shared, please reach out to me. I want to share them with the world, not just for me, it's for everyone who's listening. So yeah.
That is the most politically correct, most vanilla, most in between. I'm not offending anyone response. This is why you are great at what you do. My man, I was listening, I was just saying, man, this dude is a natural. Where did you learn these skills? Who trained you to do these things? That's a serious question. Where did you learn to do what you do? Is it just you're learning as you go? Are you practicing? Do you have any skills that you have picked up? YouTube? What's up?
I think it's honestly just a fly-by-night type of thing. I just learn as I go. But what I have found is that I think you do a lot of jobs in your. So I used to, when I was at university, for example, I used to work retail just to earn extra money, or I'd wait tables in university. And when you wait tables, or you work retail and you're client facing, or you're selling real estate, you're always talking to people all the time. So you get, after you've done that thousands of times, you get very comfortable just talking to people and just knowing what people, how people interact and so on and so forth. So in many ways, I've never really done this specifically, but in terms of talking to like people face to face, I've done so many different jobs that I used to work at a gym when I would personal train.
Of course you did. Of
Yeah,
course
I used to at our personal, so of course, the more you do that, you see so many different people every day, all the time, new faces. Eventually, just become. So I take things from there and I just try and bring that into this. But I've never been trained for. I don't know, what do they call it? I think they call it journalism or something. Is that what they call it?
No.
Or
Media training.
podcasting, media
It's
training.
media
What are they?
training. It's
Media
media
training.
training.
I haven't
Yeah.
been media trained. No.
But the reason why I ask is because, and it makes a lot of sense with the answer you've just made, because your responsibility as a person who asks questions is to try and get the best out of people, trying to get the best answer. Every question you can be asked, I can ask you the same question again and again and again, you have a different answer. But because we only have an hour or 30 minutes or 15 minutes, you need to find a way to be able to get the best possible answer out of that person at that time. And I think you do a very amazing job at that. And, you know, to just kind of cap off the who is Dumi section of our conversation today, rapid fire questions, you know, loosen the shoulders, you know what it is. It's like chop, breathe deep, just so that, you know, and obviously there's never enough questions you can ask here.
Of course.
But, you know, as quickly as you can answer them, go on then. Calling or texting?
Calling.
What? Okay.
I hate text. I hate texting. I hate it. Actually,
for real?
I find it.
That makes a lot of sense.
I call or a voice note. I hate texting. Calling, 100%.
I see. Okay. What is your favorite activity in a day?
Exercise.
Who is your best friend?
Myself, and then my wife.
Who is doing it though? Super strength or invisibility?
Invisibility.
Nimakua, you're dangerous. Water or soft drinks?
Soft drinks, no, without question. Without a question.
That kind of defeats the exercise part. Okay, fine. Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Pizza or burgers?
Pizza.
Movies or series?
Series.
Favorite sport?
Rugby.
No, I don't even know why I asked. Should have said favorite rugby team, brother. Work from home or work from the office?
Hybrid.
So blended. More days in the office, more days at home.
More days in the office.
Okay. What is your dream car?
I don't have one, but if I'm to one that I like right now, I think Teslas are cool.
Yeah, I feel you. Social media or social life?
Social life.
Yeah, man of the people.
Yeah, I like people. Social media sometimes can make you a bit depressed. I don't know. I actually delete Instagram off my phone just to like take a break. I don't know if you get the same thing where you go, I'll be scrolling down, hit like I guess like my mood will just drop. I don't know. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? Makes me a little bit depressed sometimes. So yeah, be outside. Rather than online.
Okay, I've got 3 more. Cinema or museum?
Oh, that's a good question. Museum.
Live sports or live music? So would you rather go watch
live
Lakers?
Live music.
For real?
Yeah. Live sport. I have a take on. I think TV does a great job. But live music. I went to watch Burna Boy at a stadium, and it was incredible. I stood the whole time. So I'd have live music. No question.
Coachella or the World Cup?
World Cup at soccer.
No rugby.
World Cup rugby.
Okay, all right. And my last question, you got to think about this. Zimbabwe South Africa or the States?
No context, just
Where do you want to stay, man?
where do I want to stay?
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what chapter of my
I
life.
hear well, Mr.
Depends on what
PC.
chapter.
No PC. No PC. If you need to pause this and edit it later, I don't care.
Zimbabwe.
Nice. All right. Now look, we spoke. Thank you for that. We spoke quite a bit. We can ask so many questions, and there's many things that you're involved in. So I think the last thing that I want to talk about is something that when you shared with me, I was just like, dude, what? And so and again, it goes to that thing where you don't just talk about things, you do the things. So what project have you been working on recently that you would like your listeners to know about?
Thank you so much for the kind words. So I've been working on, so I think to take a step back, I've been interested in to bring back African thought, African and story on top of that. So I think I've been interested in stories a lot. Part of the podcast is part of that general thing. And I've been trying to study why I think that more stories from Africa should be shared, specifically Zimbabwe as well. And when we were kids, I grew up with a lot of books. My mom, I wasn't a big reader per se, but we had like a bookshelf and a lot of books there. My sister used to read a lot. But one thing I found was that there were never any children's books for Africans specifically. I remember the first fictional book I read from an African writer was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and I was 17 in high school. But I was 17, so for 17 years, I never read a fictional African work. That's why I thinking back, wow, when I was a kid, what was I reading? And it was all stuff like Roald Dahl or Harry Potter, all of these things. So you see, the world is always in the West, which is fine. But I think as I go on this journey, I think it's important that we have more stories that are written by African people. And then often what happens is that stories, I think, or how we view the world, it starts at childhood. So whenever I'm doing my podcast, I always speak to people and say, how was your childhood? Because often how the childhood was informs how the adulthood was. When you read a lot of autobiographies, the childhood tells you a lot about what the adult becomes. So I found, okay, so if I was to write a story, what would it be about? As an extension of this Zimbabwean Voices idea, right? I think I'll be like, I thought it'd be cool to write a children's book, I think. Like if there was a Zimbabwean voice that I could interview or write a story about, who could I write about that everyone would know, that everyone would story would like to hear about? And I was like, I think it'd be cool to write a children's book about Oliver Mtukudzi. I think that would be quite cool. I've never done it before, but I think it'd be cool to try. So I tried to write a children's book on Oliver Mtukudzi, and I did. And yeah, we got it illustrated. We wrote the story, got it edited, and so on. So yeah, so I wrote a children's book about Oliver Mtukudzi. And I hope it's not the first. I think I want to do more. But the general thinking is that it's important for kids to hear stories and see stories on people that look like them, that come from where they come from, and are inspirational and affirmational. So that's kind of the project. So of course, I'm going to be sharing with a lot of people. Just keep an eye out for social media. You'll see where you can get it in Harare. And of course, the goal is to get it in Bulawayo, Harare. There are a couple of libraries in Nyanga, Mutare that we're speaking to that want to get it and stock it. So it's going to be stocked across the country, but just keep an eye out for that. And, if you have an uncle who has a niece, or if a brother that has a niece, or have children yourself, I think just keep an eye out for that. And I look forward to sharing it with Zimbabweans, and hopefully they'll find it useful for their children.
That is awesome, bro. That is beyond insane that you actually wrote a children's book called Tuku's Dream. I've had a look through it. The illustration is beyond beautiful. The writing is beautiful. The tone is perfect. I think it's got a natural home on every child's shelf. And I think the thing about, again, what you're doing that has got a common thread with just who you are, from the way you grew up, Gweru to Georgetown, what up, to to the Green Bar Soap, to Zimbabwean Voices, to Tuku's Dream, to whatever is coming up after, is that you're filling in gaps that we need filled. Typically people have always thought children's content, that's a no-brainer, but typically, traditionally, Zimbabweans Africans, I guess in general, don't write down their stories. We believe in passing them on. So private put Suro Nakudo, Jefunde after you reply every sentence in a story. Those things are there, but they were taught to us from our grandparents and so on and so forth. And then there was this divide. It wasn't COVID, it wasn't anything. We just stopped sharing things. People started moving to different parts of the world, and those stories died, and they're gone. And now we have to read the hungry caterpillar and greedy underpants and all this other stuff. But there's nothing that's there for us that can replace that Suronagudo, which we don't even know how to tell our children because that connection is lost. And I think that's where Tuku's Dream and all the other stories that you're going to be telling for children really fits in and just helps our people, to just be better than themselves. And those boxes you were talking about, this is hard to get rearranged. My last question to you is,
wait, on that, before you ask that, can I just I want to just get the book so you can actually can see what.
Yeah, I was about to say, that was actually my question, which is, do you have a physical copy? Because I've only seen an online version. So I was gonna ask.
I do. Sorry, it's like it does exist. It's like there.
It is.
It's like a thing.
Flip it, son. That is
so
awesome.
It is like a real thing. I just have to get it shared and figuring out logistics. It's basically I was like, this is now a company trying to get this thing. It's like a company. It's a lot of work, but it's fun. And when I say but yeah, sorry, I just thought I'd just do that so people know it's like a tangible product. It does exist. It's just about sharing it with the world now. But yeah,
awesome.
Ask your last question. Sorry.
Awesome. The last question is, why are you the guy, man? Why are you the guy? Why are you the guy who does the books? Why are you the guy who does the podcast? Why are you the guy who's pushing soap in the streets, Fight Club style? Why are you the guy?
I'm a guy. I'm not the guy. I'm just a guy. I think, someone asked me a question, to bring it back to that question you asked. It said, the name is Tadzima Dzima. She has this Ignite Youth. And the question she always asks everyone who starts an organization is like, she asks them, what do you want to be remembered for? And that's the first question she asks all the youth that work in an organization. And that's a very good, there are these questions called higher order thinking questions that help make you think deep. A lot of the time we go to work, we wake up, and it's easy to feel lost, right? I just do stuff for the sake of doing stuff. But are you defined by investment banking? Are you defined by whatever this is? Why do you even do what you do? So I think that was a good question. She asked, she said, what do you want to be remembered for? So I'm just a guy, but I try and look, at least now, the older I get, I try to look back at life from that vantage point to be like, oh, what things do you hope your kids to remember you for? Or when your body leaves this earth, what parts of your spirit do you want to remain? So I'm just a guy who's thinking about those kind of questions and tries to do things from that perspective. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of the
100%. 100%. You are constantly thinking about tomorrow's generation and what they're going to be left behind and what you, a guy, is going to be responsible for leaving behind. So I tip my invisible hat to you. I think that this conversation has been nothing short of enlightening for me. I think those people who listen to your podcast religiously, those who are going to come in to listen to your podcast religiously are going to be very grateful for this opportunity for them to actually learn why this thing actually even exists and why you keep dropping bombshell after bombshell after bombshell with the interviews. And when your mixtape comes out, I want 5%. I don't want a lot, man. I'm not. I just 3 to 5% of that. You can keep Tuku's all the Tuku's. I just want from G to G. When that comes out,
that's hard. That's a hard name. That's hard. I'm not even gonna lie. That's hard.
From where to Georgetown. You know what it is. You know it. I want 3%. I want my 3%. I even dropped it from 5 to 3. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'll let you have the last word. What would you like for people to know as we sign off?
I think firstly, thank you for taking the time to you have a busy Sunday, so thank you for taking the time to even do this. It's always a pleasure. Parting comments, just thank you. I think thank you for everyone that's taking the time to listen. You don't have to do this. So I appreciate everyone who's taking the time to listen. Yeah, it's a lot of work, this thing. It's a Sunday also, early Sunday morning, but it's more fulfilling to, of course, share. And when it gets listened to, at least it feels validating to go, okay, wow, there's that person in Harare or Johannesburg or London or Poland who is like, oh, damn, okay. Unless if I don't drop, they'll be like, wow, go how far with that? How come you haven't? You're like, wow, okay, actually, there's someone who's asked for this. I need to honor that. And then secondly, it's just the goal. Actually, I don't know if I should put this on the recording, but I guess we're here. The goal of us is to get to like 100. That's like the goal. I'm on 30 now, but of course that's like we can do that over time. But if anyone has anyone that I think would be cool to whose story they want heard, not just me, but they want heard, just reach out to me on the Zimbabwean Voices Instagram, or I have the emails there. It's hello@zimbabweanvoices.com, and you can email that email, and just get in touch. But thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Lokushaka